George's Crypt, and then we'll finish off through the prison wing itself. But let's start off at the very beginning, shall we? So, Oxford started off as a small Anglo-Saxon town by the name of Oxenfordre, and to protect us from the Vikings, we built 4 stone towers, and they were amazingly named the North Gate, East Gate, South Gate, and West Gate, which is where we currently are, which is why we have the Westgate Shopping Centre just over that way there. Except the tower that we are in is not called Westgate Tower. They decided to call it St. George's Tower instead, named after St. George. Now in 1066 we had the Battle of Hastings, where William the Conqueror defeated King Harold for the throne of England, and after this he decided to give parts of England to his loyal barons. And so Oxford was gifted to a man by the name of Robert D'Oyly, who in 1071 built the castle around the tower that we are in right now. And if you look at the walls either side of me, you can see that they are incredibly thick. In fact, they are 3 meters thick, or 9 feet thick, which we discovered is very good at keeping people out, but also very good at keeping people in, which is why in 1216 we opened our doors for the very first time as a functioning prison. Except the very first prisoners that we had here were not your stereotypical ones. They were actually the drunk and rowdy students from Oxford University. Yes, except they were 14 years old, drunk, and wielding swords. So a little bit more dangerous than today's ones, I'd say. Well, I hope. Now we continued to be in prison all the way up until 1996, so not that long ago at all. But the worst time to be a prisoner here was during the Victorian times, because this is when we introduced hard labour, which was long, grueling, and most definitely pointless work to stop you wanting to come into prison. And in this room behind me here used to be a device called a capstan wheel. So you normally find a capstan wheel on a ship to raise and lower an anchor. However, we used ours to get water out of our mill from down below. So I want you all to imagine, in the centre of this room is a huge wheel, and you'd have 16 prisoners chained to it, and they'd have to continuously walk around in circles for hours and hours and hours, staring at the same 4 walls. And water would be pushed up from the mill down below, up through some pipes, and into 2 large water tanks, which we'll see very shortly. But if you look at the floorboards, you can see that they've been warped and distorted into these rim shapes, and these were purely created by the footsteps of the prisoners, just from walking around in those circles. So these floorboards are over 200 years old. But speaking of hard labour, I think it's only fair that we should give it a go ourselves, as we climb the 101 stairs to the top of St. George's Tower. Now, before we do so, I will mention a few things. Firstly, there is a break halfway up, so we won't do all of the stairs at one go. Secondly, it is optional. You don't actually have to do it. You're more than welcome to stay down here. I could put a video on for you, and then we'll scoop you up when we come back down. Next thing to mention, the stairs that we're going to climb are called Norman trip steps. They're designed to kill you. At least they were back in the day. You see, they're made out of different shapes and sizes. The plan was, if you were the enemy charging up the stairs with a sword in your hand, hopefully you would trip, fall, stab yourself on the way down, and you'd be one less person for them to worry about up at the top. And the final thing I'll mention is that door that we all just came through is the tallest one on the tower. So, if you had to duck through that, you'll have to duck through the rest of them as well. Now, is there anyone who would prefer to just stay down here? Yeah? Fantastic. Allow me to put the video on for you there. Wonderful. For the rest of you, if you would like to follow me up the stairs this way. Right this way, my friend. Do just mind your head as you go on through. hours, when the capstan wheel downstairs, water would be pushed up through these pipes into the water tanks, but as soon as you stopped turning the capstan wheel, all of that water just came back down the pipes and back into the mill. So all of your hard work was for nothing. They wanted you to feel very miserable during your time here. Now, whilst we're in this room, there are two stories I'd like to tell you all. And the first one is about Oxford's very own princess who came to stay here. And her name was Empress Matilda. So she was the granddaughter of William the Conqueror and the daughter of King Henry I. Now, the reason she was Empress Matilda rather than Princess Matilda was because when she was 12 years old, she married the Holy Roman Emperor, known as Henry V. And so she took on the name Empress and had it for the rest of her life. However, when she was 26 years old, she was sadly widowed and left childless, and she needed another child to continue her bloodline. So she has an arranged marriage to Geoffrey of Anjou, who was 13 years old. She was 26. As you can imagine, not the happiest of marriages. However, they did have 3 children, and during the birth of their second child, unfortunately, her father, the king, had died, meaning that someone else needed to take over as the next ruler. So she heads back to England from France to do so. Except when she gets there, her cousin Stephen's already got there first, and proclaimed himself as the new king of England. So this starts off as a little bit of a family feud. It then turns into a civil war called the Anarchy. And in 1142, that civil war comes here to Oxford. So Matilda and 3 of her trusted men are trapped inside this tower and surrounded by Stephen and his army. The plan was to wait for her to run out of food and water until she hopefully surrendered. But she never did. In fact, she escaped. And there's a famous story that goes with this, and it goes like this. One dark, snowy December night, Matilda and her trusted men, dressed from head to toe, all in white, so they blended with the snow outside. They then tie their bed sheets together, climb up the window until they get to the base of the tower. And once they get there, they all start walking backwards, away from the tower, so their footprints look like they're going to the tower. Then, apparently, she puts on ice skates and skates across the frozen River Thames all the way to Abingdon, where she then gets on horseback and rides to Wallingford Castle to continue the war. I do think it's been slightly embellished over the years. However, it still makes for a fun story. Now, unfortunately, Matilda never became the next ruler. In fact, her and Stephen came to a truce. And the deal was that Stephen was allowed to continue to be the king, but when he died, it was then up to Matilda's firstborn son to take over as the next king. So Matilda's son ends up becoming King Henry II, who starts the Plantagenet dynasty, which is the longest running dynasty we've had in England, lasting over 300 years. Now the second story. Oh, nice story. It's another civil war, this time in 1642, between King Charles I and Parliament. So King Charles I was a little bit controversial, because he made a few decisions that some people didn't agree with. One of them being he wanted to get rid of Parliament altogether, because he didn't like them meddling with his business, basically. But of course Parliament didn't like this idea, so they retaliated, and out broke a civil war between the Royalists and the Parliamentarians. Now King Charles I wanted to make Oxford the brand new capital of England, rather than London, so he ended up moving here. But rather than living in Oxford Castle, he decided to live in Christchurch, because this area was not pretty enough for him. So rather than let it go to waste, he ends up using it as a prisoner of war camp instead. And in this room, you would have up to 60 parliamentarian prisoners. 60. So if you wanted to go to sleep, you'd have to lean against the walls, or lean against each other to prod each other up, because you did not want to sleep on the floor. You may have noticed, there's no toilets in this room, and of course, you're all traitors to the king, so you don't deserve the bucket. So if you needed to go to the toilet, you just went where you stood, and you'd be up to just above your ankles in human ways. It gets worse, unfortunately. You see, because of this, it meant disease would spread very, very quickly, and a lot of men would lose their lives. And if you died in this room, your body was just left to rot amongst the living. That was up until cleaning day, which was once every 3 months. So you can imagine the smell. Now sadly, all of this continued for 4 years, until 1646, when finally the leader of the parliamentarians, Sir Thomas Fairfax, comes to Oxford and discovers the horrors that have been going on here. And he was so angry about what he saw, he wanted to destroy everything. And he pretty much did, which is why there's nothing really left of the original castle. All that's left is St. George's Tower, where we currently are. He also left the mound, the big hill outside, and he also left St. George's Crypt, which we'll go to a little bit later on. But for now, what we're going to do is continue our climb all the way to the top. So just to remind you all, please do mind your heads, and the stairs are still trying to kill you. So please do take your time. And I'll see you all at the top.
Come on, slow.
Yeah. Catch my breath. Yeah.
It is very cool, yeah. When you go to the top, you can be able to see within 10 miles of every direction. Now, when Robert Doyley first wanted to build a castle in Oxford, he wanted to do a very simple motte and bailey design. So the motte meaning the mound, the hill, and the bailey meaning the powerful settlement within the castle. And originally, on top of the mound used to be an inside tower called the keep. And this was the last form of defense we had against the Vikings. Originally, it was made out of wood, but it kept getting burnt out. Now we finally learned our lesson. However, on the reoccurring theme of this door, Fairfax wants to Can you